Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys, and in today's video, we're going to talk about the idea of wildlife photography and putting your subject into context. I'll explain what I mean by that right after this. Now in today's video, we're going to talk about this idea of putting your subject into context. It's a little bit of a quick thoughts video, but also a video about how to improve your bird photography. So I've got two playlists down there. I'll feature both playlists. You can check these out later. But this concept evolved. I was given a speech and I was talking about some of my images, and I found myself referencing this bird feels right here, or this is the habitat it lives in, or this is the story this image tells. And one thing about my photography is I consider myself a bird portrait artist, not an action photographer. In wildlife photography in general, we have a lot of genres, including storytelling and documentation and action photography, but I consider myself one who takes portraits. And in these portraits, I found myself using this expression, it tells a story, and it made me think, how am I telling a story by just showing the subject? One subject by itself, not interacting with another subject, and often not interacting with anything else. How am I telling a story there? And it made me think a lot about this concept. So I want you to imagine for a second somebody who takes professional headshots, and imagine that picture and what that would look like. Would it tell a story? Now, maybe it would, but for the most part, maybe it's just a beautiful representation of the person. Now, counter that with maybe a street artist or a street photographer who's also taking pictures of people. But now maybe they're trying to tell a story, whether it's through the environment around the person or even the person itself, facial expressions, wrinkles, features of the person. We look at that and we might think of, what's the backstory to this person? Where are they? What was their life like? Listen to that idea. Think about that idea. And then tell me if this makes sense as we apply it to wildlife photography. Now, in today's video, I'm going to feature some of my patrons. I'm going to show you some of my own work, and I want to explore this idea of putting a subject into context. We may also consider this like putting it into a habitat or telling a story through a simple portrait. Let me show you an example here. I'll put a small illustration up here of what I'm talking about, and maybe this will help explain it. The subject here is a cattle egret, and by itself, I could make a wonderful portrait out of it with no background, a clean image, really nice light. I could do that. But would it tell the story of what a cattle egret does? See, cattle egrets have a relationship often with cows and in this case, a horse. So does it make more sense to tell the story of a cattle egret by framing it inside the horse itself? Does that make sense? Now, hopefully it does. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch views real quick, and I'm going to pull up a bunch of images, and we're just going to explore this idea. And I'm going to show you some ways that I thought people did a really nice job creating context around their subjects. So let's get to it. Now, the majority of these images are going to be for my patrons. I'll put some information in the description down below of the video. You can check that out. There's a link down there. But let's just get right into this. I'll name the artist. If I forget their names, I'll put it down at the bottom. This is Andrew Krager. This is an albatross. And I thought, often albatross are in very open environments. So they're seabirds. And how can we put it into a context that might be a little bit more appealing? I thought this was really well done. Not only does it tell the story of where the bird is in a very pretty way, it also gives you this sense that the seas were rough that day. So I liked this because it gave a little bit more story. And again, that's kind of the theme here. Are we getting some kind of story behind these simple portraits? Does it give a little bit of a story? Let me show you another one. This one by Nathan Watson, a very talented photographer. And instead of just putting a duck on the water, we instantly connect with the environment. So we're using habitat, we're using the rest of the frame to tell a story. In this case, what looks like a real downpour of a day for this American coot. I've got an image this is by Johanik, and I liked the framing on this, and I also thought it was appropriate for this bird. Often with shorebirds and waders, we see them on coasts, on shore regions, and that makes sense, but sometimes we don't get a full context of habitat. But in this case, we almost get a sense of where it is just by the framing of those plants above. Now, I joked with Adam and I said, if it was my image, I might have digitally removed that stick. You guys know, if you watch some of my videos, I do some light digital manipulation. I like to clean those images up a little bit. I do feel it's important to present that honestly, so I try to disclose when I do editing, but I do tons of contest entries as well. And those edited, in those images, you can't do digital manipulation. But again, that framing shows that this particular bird is in I'm guessing a mangrove swamp. So I just thought that was really well done. And speaking of putting it into a kind of a swampy atmosphere, I love when you can put it into habitat. And this is a really good example of context. I've got two here to show you. This one by Ed Daly. Instantly, I connect with this as being in the American Southeast. So that Spanish moss hanging off of the trees. I used to live down in Charleston, South Carolina as a kid. It brought me instantly back to that place. So the subject, yes, great picture of the subject, but putting it into context. In this case, I can regionally identify with where this bird is simply by the background, and I can do it right here as well. I'm guessing these spoonbills are Georgia, Florida, down in that area somewhere, and instantly I can connect with the part of the country. So yes, the spoonbills are pretty, the owl was pretty, but the photo has a total completion of habitat, and it instantly draws me to a specific area, in this case, a specific area of the country. Let's get into the beach a little bit. I didn't have a lot of beach submissions for this little entry that I did, but this is by Ruth Davis. And here's what I liked about this one. While often we photograph at the beach, we might see just clear blue sky in the background or a clear ocean in the background. The inclusion of those marsh grasses I thought was really, really well done. It puts them in a place. And also the little shells. I thought the shells were a great touch. Often on beach scenes, the sand can be a little rough. This is actually really pretty sand with some nice shells and a really pretty background. So I particularly liked that one. Now here's a really simple image. This is by Kent Stewart, and it just puts the blackbird where it should be. So I thought this idea of context, I wanted to show some very simple images where the bird feels right. I told you in the presentation I was given, I used that phrase several times, and I thought it just felt right there based off of where the bird should be. I thought this was a nice example, and I've got a couple more similar to that. In this case, this hawk has tremendous scale. So it shows you the enormity of the trees that it's on. And the hawk, very, very small in frame with this. Some really nice composition. Again, in the habitat, doing what it does, as hawks often do. By the way, I have one of my key elements for photography is perspective. And when you can get a perched hawk that's maybe 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 feet in the air, and you can get it at eye level, I think that's really, really well done. So I wanted to highlight this image overall because there's a lot that I like about the image. And I wanted to include it in this video, but let's show you some more context. Let's show you habitat. Let's show you some storytelling without any action. This is simply a robin, and look at the look. Looking at those berries, it's almost like he's telling a story. Which berry should I pick? There's not many left here. This is by Becky Searing. Really, really great image. It tells the story of winter, so we instantly identify it. Past the subject, we instantly identify with this image as being in winter, and we instantly we kind of hear this story of the robin looking for food. And in this case, there's not a whole lot of berries to choose from. Really, really well done. Sometimes the habitat, the context, it might even tell the story of the bird itself. I've got a few illustrations of this where you're going to see the context, the habitat, the environment, reflecting the name of the bird. This is a mountain bluebird. And guess what? Look at the mountains in the background. It's a perfect illustration of this concept. I thought really, really well done. I've got a couple more winter images, and this one I struggled with. At first, this one was submitted, by the way, by Carrie Snyder, and this one I struggled with. Here's why I struggled with it. Often I look at photographs as artistically beautiful. And this is not a commentary to Carrie about the artistic merits of this. He actually submitted two. The other one I thought was artistically better. More likely that I would sell that one as a print. But here's the story. And sometimes with storytelling, remember we have people that identify as portrait artists, and we have people that identify as storytellers. And to me, this image would work perfectly in a story, a conservation story. I can almost read the story about how important it is to leave things unmowed. Now, look at what's going on. Sparrow's not really doing anything, but you get the sense that it is getting ready to feed. If you look at the top of this image, and it'll be over here on the top right, you're going to see some seeds up there. Now imagine the story, the written story here, or the caption was about feeding in the winter and how many birds can struggle to do it. You see where I'm going with this. Now, I didn't need that written story. In my head, I just feel like, wow, it's lucky for this bird that those grasses are untouched. With that snowfall, which could be a foot or 2 feet or 3 feet deep, In a different environment, that bird would be out of food. It would not have a food source. But in this particular case, it had a food source. So do you understand what I'm getting at here? The story being told without any words. And I thought this was a really, really nice example of that story. I'm going to put in a couple images of my own, getting into this kind of winter theme and context. And sometimes just putting a bird where it belongs. This was one of the images that I used in the presentation that I was given. And I thought a rough-legged hawk for me is a species that reflects winter. And I was fortunate enough to capture this flying over the mountains of Utah. And I got everything in the frame and it worked really, really well for me. So while it's not a super complex image, just that little element reflects the characteristics of the bird. Does that make sense? That connection between the subject in the right place or the subject telling a story through the other parts of the image. I thought that was a good illustration of that. And here's one that's just gives you a sense of where it is. So sometimes these ideas of context just say, where is this bird? And we know it's in the sky, but do we really know it's above the clouds in this case? So the clouds are in the background. This sharp-shinned hawk appears to even be above those clouds as it flies across. Really nice image. Those are two of mine. This one's by Sanco. I thought this was a neat image, and I tried to qualify this for my patrons as don't send me action shots. Don't send me things behaving with each other. I don't know if I made an exception on this, but the story here, to me, this appeared to be a young wren that was calling for food. So the context of it, it didn't give me as much habitat as some of the other ones, but I wanted to show this image just to show you how sometimes the behavior can influence. But I'm trying to feature images, or I'm trying to feature these photos today that don't necessarily feature behavior. So let's take a look at the next one by Barb Ward blank in the nuthatch. What a perfect environment for this nuthatch. It absolutely works. And look at the framing. Look at the cones there. It's got like this complete image. And here's the other thing. It tells a story of size, because we can relate to the size of these pine cones, and seeing that nuthatch, how small it is on those pine cones, gives us a really good indication of size. So it's more than just a portrait. It's telling the story of where this lives, also the size that it is. Sometimes we can tell stories through seasonality. You know, when I think of summer, I think of meadows, and a lot of people think of sunflowers. And so instantly, by including this subject small in frame and featuring the flowering field, we instantly recognize, or at least I do, I instantly recognize it as summer. And in my head, I can even tell you, this feels like July to me. So this image tells a story to me of midsummer and these sunflowers in bloom. The bird doesn't even really have a lot of detail to it. It's not about this bird. It's about the context. That's the theme of this video. And this is a field sparrow. This is by Cami Freed. First of all, just exquisite composition and a lovely isolation. You could see that the left side is a little more in focus, but the right side's really out of focus. So that bokeh, that out of focus element, I thought was super, super attractive. And we start to introduce the idea of colors representing seasons. To me, if I had to pick a color for summer, it's yellow. And so we get a sense instantly of the season here simply by including that habitat. And let me show you a couple examples of how color can be used. I'm going to show you 3 in a row here. Now, these are my images. So I just went to cater this. And around this idea of color, if I showed you this color, what do you think of right away? It's got to be spring, right? That blooming flower, that pink feel, that pastel almost always resonates with spring. Let me show you another one here. And again, there's no detail in the foreground or background. There's no identifiable plant back there. Instantly, that color of yellow, that one makes you feel summer. At least it does me, and maybe it does you as well. Let me show you one more. Change of season. What does that one represent to you? Now we're getting into the oranges. And there's not a lot of red in that one, but we'll call it orange. So those yellows and oranges together, that reminds me, at least for me, it reminds me of autumn. And when I talk about telling the story in my area, that sparrow, that Lincoln sparrow, only comes in this area, or generally only comes in this area, in the fall. So having that color palette in the background completes the context. It completes the story of this bird. At least it does for me. Am I making sense so far? Got a couple more images to show you. Let's get beyond autumn, and let's talk about what happens as the plants die back. And here we've got a goldfinch, this one by Krista Chappell. And the story is that this is where this bird eats. This is where it feeds. These are the types of plants, these coneflowers. These are the types of plants that this particular bird, this very specific bird, finches, need seed. It tells a really, really great story about the relationship between that bird and its environment or that plant. This one I really like. This is by Alexis Lawler. And the wren, the pose of the wren. So we talk about like telling stories. Look at the colors. So to me, the story is about autumn. So we see that reflected in the colors. We see that the wren, the colors of the wren are reflected in the scene itself. Really well done. Maybe there's another story here about that pose. I know people don't love to hear about projecting human emotions or human gestures or human expressions onto animals. I know that bothers some people, but I, as an artist, don't mind it at all. And in this one, I feel like this is a little tiny soldier. So this has two stories. It's got the story of autumn and why that bird might even be that color, why it's evolved to that color to blend in with its environment. It's on the ground, which is where it belongs. Again, that's the right context for it. And maybe there's a little story here too, just about that pose and that posture. Now, I told you earlier, sometimes the name of the subject might reflect the environment. The name of this bird is a rock wren. I wanted to include this. Now, the behavior I tried to stay away from. So I would almost have include like this one without that little scorpion. The scorpion, by the way, is a beautiful touch. But for the context of this video, I really just wanted to make it about the subject and the environment. I couldn't pass it up. It's a rock wren on a pile of rocks. How perfect is that environment? And that's what I mean about the bird feeling, or the subject, any wildlife subject, feeling like it's in the right place. That idea of being in the right place, I thought this one was really neat. This image, the last image by Daniel Gomez, this one by Susie Grathwohl. And this, and I don't mean to be critical of the image. It's not an image that I would say is one that I would hang on my wall. So Scott, why are you putting it? I selected, there's a lot of images I had a lot of submissions, but they didn't fit the context of this video, but that wood duck really did. And here's why. Almost all ducks live on the water and against the shoreline. Very few ducks will actually perch in trees for long periods of time. Here's one that doesn't. The wood duck. So remember I talked about the rock wren in the rocks and the mountain bluebird against the mountains. Here's a wood duck perched in the woods. And I thought just that idea really fit into this video. And I'm going to finish with one more. I think I have maybe my favorite of this series. This is by Jim Spikard. And what a great scene. I showed you similar scenes with the Spanish moss and how you instantly identify maybe with a part of the country or an area. I could think about like the Pacific Northwest has a feel to it. Sometimes like the North or the Rockies have a feel to them sometimes. The Southwest has a feel. This one feels like Florida to me. So the subject here is completely encapsulated in its habitat. These birds have different habitats that they live in, they feed in, they breed in. But in this case, I just thought, wow, this is just an impressive image overall. A beautiful habitat, beautiful context. And I hope you appreciate this image as well as all of the others. I want to thank my patrons for submitting to this, or for submitting these images to me. And I just have a couple questions before I wrap up. Did I get this out of my head? I've been thinking about this for a few weeks. Did I express what I wanted to express? Did I get the sense that the subject feels right in certain environments? Sometimes the environment helps tell a story, and it can be about the habitat itself, the right habitat for the right subject. Maybe it's even about things like the location of the habitat or the season that subject is in at the time of the capture. God, I really, really tried to get this one out of my head. Maybe I'll sleep tonight and I could stop thinking about this idea of placing wildlife subjects in the right context. But if you have any questions, if I wasn't clear on what I did or I didn't illustrate it, let me know down in the comments. Or maybe there's something I missed, or maybe you have some thoughts on this. Do you consciously think about this when you're in the field, or perhaps when you're culling to choose a photo or editing the photo? Is that conscious? And there is no right or wrong. I try to say this as many times as I can in my videos. My style's not right. This isn't a judgment on this is the way it should be done. Here's what it is though. This is a style that can really, really work, especially in certain conditions. if you're accompanying pictures to words, so if you've got a written story or you're trying to convey a mood or it's a conservation piece, often these types of images can be much more powerful because they give you context. So let me know your thoughts down in the video. I really appreciate you tuning in for this one. If you're not subscribed to the channel, I'm going to remind you, hit that little subscribe button down there. And if you like the video, hit the thumbs up, hit the bell for notifications so you know when I have a new video out. And as always, I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.